The 11th of December, 2008, Manhattan, New York. FBI agents step into the penthouse apartment of one of Wall Street's most respected men. Bernie Madoff, in a robe, greets them with 5 words. It's all one big lie. By the time they leave, they've uncovered a $65 billion fraud, the largest in financial history. This is the story of how one banker moved $65 billion without anyone noticing. Before he became a criminal, Bernie Madoff was a legend. He launched his own trading firm in 1960 with $5,000 he'd saved from lifeguarding and installing sprinklers. It started small penny stocks, over-the-counter trades, but Madoff had a vision for something bigger. While Wall Street clung to paper and handshakes, he embraced technology. He was one of the first to build electronic systems for executing trades, cutting out middlemen and making millions in the process. He didn't just participate in the market, he helped change how it functioned. He was respected not just as a trader, but as a reformer. In the 1990s, he served as chairman of NASDAQ, one of the most powerful positions in American finance. He advised the Securities and Exchange Commission. He mentored young brokers. He was consulted on financial regulation and innovation. In a world full of ego and flash, Madoff stood apart, understated, well-dressed, and calm. A man who didn't need to sell himself because everyone already believed in him. Clients trusted him with their life savings. Charities gave him their endowments. Banks begged to work with him. Celebrities, hedge funds, pension managers, all quietly passed around his name like a secret too good to share. And unlike other fund managers who made big promises with big risks, Madoff delivered quiet consistency, 10 to 12% annual returns, year after year. No drama, no volatility. Just steady gains, like clockwork. He played golf with billionaires, donated to hospitals, and served on philanthropic boards. Everyone called him Uncle Bernie. To some, he was a financial wizard. To others, a trusted friend. He wasn't just part of the financial system, he was one of its most trusted pillars. But behind that soft smile and impeccable reputation, something was wrong. Something was missing. And no one, not his clients, not his partners, not even the government, had the slightest idea. Because the man who had helped modernize Wall Street was about to burn it down from the inside. While his legitimate brokerage operated on the upper floors, Bernie Madoff built something else entirely just one floor below a secret, sealed world. On the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building in Manhattan, Madoff ran his investment advisory business. It wasn't advertised. It didn't recruit openly. Most people inside his company didn't even know how it worked or that it existed at all. Entry required clearance. Staff were hand-picked, often family members or loyal insiders who wouldn't ask questions. There were no Bloomberg terminals, no phones ringing, no monitors streaming live market data. Just a handful of employees, a few computers, and a dot matrix printer from the 1980s. What Madoff claimed to offer was unique, steady, positive returns, year after year, in any market. His stated strategy, the so-called split-strike conversion, supposedly involved buying shares of blue-chip companies, hedging with options, and adjusting positions as the market fluctuated. It sounded sophisticated. It was the kind of strategy that could confuse outsiders while sounding just credible enough to insiders who wanted to believe. But there were no trades. There was no portfolio. Investor money was never invested in the market at all. It sat in a Chase bank account and was used to pay out returns to older investors, creating the illusion of consistent performance. The account statements were fabricated. The trades were imaginary. Everything his clients received, charts, gains, confirmation slips, was generated manually, with no real-time connection to any exchange. Even Madoff's printer was symbolic, loud, slow, and outdated but still running, just like the scheme itself. To outsiders, Madoff cultivated exclusivity. He often rejected prospective clients, claiming his fund was full. This only made people want in more. Wealth managers competed to get their clients into Madoff's inner circle. It became a status symbol, not just to earn returns, but to say you knew Bernie. And that was the genius of the black box. It didn't have to prove anything. It didn't need transparency or audits or logic. It only needed trust. And as long as that trust held, the lie would keep growing unchallenged, undetected, and entirely invisible. On the surface, Bernie Madoff's operation looked ordinary, professional, calm, even boring. But inside the 17th floor office, the reality was surreal. Madoff was running a $65 billion Ponzi scheme with the tools of a bygone era. There was no cutting-edge technology, no real-time market feeds, just a small, aging team of trusted staff, some with little to no formal financial training. Their job wasn't to trade, it was to fabricate. Month after month, they produced fake account statements showing consistent returns. They printed out fictional trades that matched Madoff's split-strike conversion story. But the trades weren't real. The numbers were made up. There was no actual buying or selling of stocks. Instead, Madoff used incoming investor money to pay out older investors' textbook Ponzi logic. But what made his scheme different wasn't the method. It was the scale and the presentation. Madoff understood that people don't question what they want to believe. He also knew that most investors, even professionals, wouldn't demand transparency if they were getting results, especially consistent ones. So while markets crashed, soared, or stagnated, Madoff's clients saw the same thing every month: quiet, predictable profits. He never promised windfalls. He promised stability. While others chased high-risk, high-reward ventures, Madoff sold safety. It felt responsible. It felt conservative. That's what made it so convincing. The actual process was astonishingly crude. Fake trades were typed manually. Reports were mailed out to clients, sometimes showing stock prices on days the market had been closed. Some account statements listed trades for more shares than were available on the public market, but no one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't want to be the one who ruined a good thing. Even more shocking was the firm that audited Madoff's $65 billion empire, Freeling and Horowitz, a 3-person accounting firm operating out of a strip mall in Rockland County, New York. It had no capacity to review complex financials, no real compliance team, but year after year, it signed off on Madoff's books. Without question, regulators were no better. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened multiple investigations into Madoff between 1992 and 2007, and each time they closed the file. They asked the wrong questions. They trusted the wrong man. Even when red flags were raised, the assumption was always the same: Bernie Madoff wouldn't do that. But he was doing it every day. Clients believed their money was invested in blue-chip stocks. In reality, it was sitting in a Chase bank account under Madoff's control. When clients asked to withdraw, he paid them with money from other investors. And as long as more people put money in than took it out, the illusion could continue. There was no miracle algorithm, no secret strategy, just an ever-growing lie wrapped in smooth paper, printed with fictional numbers, and delivered by a man everyone wanted to believe. The most disturbing part of Bernie Madoff's scheme wasn't how it worked. It was how long it worked and how many people looked away. Over nearly 2 decades, Madoff's investment advisory business was investigated multiple times by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Whistleblowers submitted detailed warnings. Financial experts raised red flags. But no one, not regulators, not auditors, not industry peers, ever shut him down. Why? Because no one wanted to believe the man at the center of it all could be lying. From the outside, Madoff was the model of financial integrity. He had chaired NASDAQ. He gave to hospitals, universities, and charities. He spoke at conferences and rubbed elbows with senators. He wore expensive suits, drove modest cars, and never flaunted wealth. He was calm, understated, even fatherly. And in a world where appearance often outweighs proof, that was enough. But there were warnings, loud ones. In 1999, a financial analyst named Harry Markopolos submitted a detailed report to the SEC titled "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." He showed mathematically that Madoff's returns were statistically impossible. He proved that Madoff couldn't have been using the strategy he claimed. And he warned that if regulators didn't act, billions would disappear. The report was ignored. Markopolos submitted follow-ups. He called, he visited, he begged the SEC to listen. Still, nothing happened. Part of the failure was technical. The SEC didn't have the right tools or the trained staff to understand complex derivatives or option strategies. But the bigger failure was psychological. Madoff was an industry icon. To accuse him of fraud was like accusing a surgeon of murder. People assumed the numbers were real because they had always been real. Banks didn't ask questions because their clients were profiting. Fund managers didn't push for transparency because being associated with Madoff attracted more money. Everyone was winning, and no one wanted to be the person who ended the party. Madoff knew this. He weaponized trust. He built his empire on silence and reputation, and he understood that in finance, sometimes the illusion of stability is more powerful than the truth. That's how $65 billion moved in and out of one man's office, and no one stopped him. For years, Bernie Madoff's empire operated like a well-oiled illusion. But even the most convincing lie can't survive a reality check. And in 2008, reality hit hard. When the global financial crisis struck, investors everywhere panicked. Hedge funds were hemorrhaging, banks were collapsing, people wanted their money, and they wanted it fast. Madoff's clients, many of whom had trusted him with their entire fortunes, began calling in their withdrawals. The problem? The money wasn't there. Madoff had no reserves, no actual portfolio to liquidate, just a single Chase bank account and a dwindling supply of new investors. For years, he'd been paying redemptions using incoming funds. Now, the inflow had stopped, and the outflow had become a flood. By December, the scheme was days from imploding. On the 10th of December, 2008, in a private conversation with his sons, Madoff confessed, "It's all one big lie." He told them the truth, that there was no investment strategy, no returns, no trades, just a giant Ponzi scheme. The next day, his sons alerted federal authorities. Madoff was arrested at his penthouse apartment, still wearing his robe. When news broke, it was as if the financial world had been hit by a second collapse. Billionaires lost fortunes. Charities folded overnight. Pension funds were wiped out. Entire families saw their savings evaporate. Some victims had invested directly with Madoff. Others had no idea they were even exposed. Their money had been placed with Madoff through third-party funds, feeder firms, and financial advisors. The web was enormous. The damage was global. And the betrayal was personal. These weren't gamblers chasing risky gains. Many had trusted Madoff precisely because he wasn't flashy, because he had always promised caution, not greed. But that caution had been a disguise the most convincing mask a fraud could wear. In March 2009, Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies, including securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. He showed no remorse. He didn't ask for leniency. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison, effectively a life sentence. But for thousands of victims, the sentence didn't bring closure. The money was gone, the trust was gone, and the man who had ruined them had done it with a smile, a handshake, and a promise of safety. Bernie Madoff was gone, but the damage he left behind was just beginning to surface. In the months following his arrest, investigators uncovered the staggering reach of the fraud. Over 4,000 clients had been affected. Schools, nonprofits, pension funds, retirement accounts, all gutted. Lifelong savings had vanished in an instant. Some victims had to return to work in their 70s. Others never recovered. A handful, overwhelmed by loss, took their own lives. For those tasked with cleaning up the wreckage, the job was monumental. Attorney Irving Picard, the court-appointed trustee, began the painstaking work of recovering money. He couldn't give people back what they'd imagined they'd earned. Those were fictional profits. But he could try to reclaim what had actually been deposited. Over the years, Picard clawed back billions by suing banks, feeder funds, and beneficiaries who had unknowingly profited from the scheme. By 2020, more than $14 billion had been recovered, a historic figure, but still far short of the $65 billion total on paper. Madoff's name became synonymous with fraud. His story entered textbooks, courtrooms, and financial ethics seminars. The term Madoff became shorthand for betrayal on a grand scale. For regulators, it was a moment of deep reckoning. The SEC, humiliated by its repeated failure to act, vowed reforms, new whistleblower programs, better surveillance tools, more independent auditing practices, and stricter oversight of private investment funds. But for many, the damage was already done. And while Madoff sat in a North Carolina prison, his family unraveled. One son, Mark, died by suicide on the second anniversary of Bernie's arrest. The other, Andrew, died of cancer a few years later. Both insisted they had no knowledge of the fraud. Madoff's wife, Ruth, publicly distanced herself, living under a new identity in near total isolation. In 2021, Bernie Madoff died in prison at the age of 82. There were no public memorials, no tributes, no eulogies, just silence. But his legacy endures not in wealth, but in warning. He exposed a fundamental truth, that in the world of finance, reputation can be more powerful than regulation. He showed how greed, fear, and trust can form a dangerous alliance. And he proved that even the most sophisticated systems can collapse under the weight of a single lie. A man, a bank account, and a promise. Bernie Madoff didn't steal money with a weapon. He did it with paper, with calm words, polite smiles, and numbers that looked just close enough to real. That's what made his fraud so dangerous. It didn't look like a crime. It looked like success. He didn't prey on greed alone. He preyed on trust, reputation, and fear of asking the wrong questions. And for years, it worked because no one wanted to believe that someone like him could be lying. But the truth is, anyone can lie. And any system, no matter how advanced, can be fooled if people choose comfort over scrutiny. That's why stories like this matter. If you believe in shining a light on the systems, people, and blind spots that shape our world, then hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes, the next great deception is already in motion, and the truth needs a head start.